that are popping in as they grab their lunches and coffees and all that good stuff. So please feel free to put questions in the chat. Please feel free to ask whatever you need to ask for clarification. Brandy is my co-host today, and she is going to be helping manage the chat and make sure that I'm seeing those questions. Um, I really like to have an interactive format, but I also know in the webinar format, sometimes that can be intimidating a little bit. So please do not hesitate. If you want to send a text, you can also just send one to Brandy, and she'll be able to get that through a side chat if you don't want your name to be recorded as giving that question. And we are going to respect anonymity here. A little bit about myself. I really got kind of addicted to how forgiveness plays into healing when I became a trauma therapist. I have been a therapist, a licensed therapist here for about 25 years. And my work has really morphed within not only the service member, family, and veteran community, but over a lot of individuals who see trauma. And what I really discovered is that even with the best evidence-based modalities, EMDRs and cognitive processing therapy and or prolonged exposure, trauma-focused CBT, sometimes there's just a very treatment-resistant brand. And what I found very personally is that when you can incorporate some forgiveness modalities into that, your results sometimes magnify when those cases are very treatment resistant. And so when I did my research for my follow-on degrees, I really concentrated my study about forgiveness and the trauma evidence-based modalities. And there's so much really great information about there. And I promise I'm not going to nerd out on you all today. I'm going to present a very common language. I promise I won't give you statistics and studies and things like that. But rest assured that there's been a lot of research that has been done about helping people really practice forgiveness and how that really helps heal the brain, especially when people have been through either big T traumas or little t traumas. I've been a therapist for just about 30 years now. I was a military spouse. My husband retired out and privileged to be a veteran spouse now. And for the last 7 years, I have worked with Alaska Behavioral Health, running the Cohen clinics here in Alaska. If you have any questions about what we do, I invite you to please check out our website. Today really is going to be a secular research driven and focused on the psychological and relational components of forgiveness. And the reason I start with that is the word forgiveness can actually be alienating to some people. Some people actually hear that and they think, oh, I can't forgive unless I have some type of spirituality in my life. And while there certainly is a wonderful breath of forgiveness that comes into a spiritual line of thought or a spiritual line of practicing, I want everyone here to just understand that there is also a very secular or non-religious part of forgiveness that has been studied, and it really helps heal the brain. So we're just going to look at that aspect today. Again, lots of other studies if you're interested in more. We're going to look at how forgiveness really impacts the brain and body, what parts of your brain actually heal. We're going to talk about why it can be so difficult. And we're going to actually talk about how those processes really help build relationships. You don't need to share anything. You don't need to come off mute. You don't need to do anything. I want to understand that this is a very personal process. And I'm just really grateful that you're coming here today to either learn a little bit more or widen your view of what forgiveness can bring into the therapeutic journey. Okay. So I want to start with what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. I often start questioning clients or start questioning individuals about what they believe forgiveness is. And forgiveness is really defined very differently by different people. So I want everyone to hear this. There's no right or wrong, but there is an accepted version of forgiveness. There is a psychological definition of it, and there is a spiritual definition of it. So for our purposes today, we're going to talk about two different types of forgiveness. The first of which is called decisional forgiveness. And this is basically when you make the decision to forgive or a conscious commitment to change how we intend to behave towards someone who may have hurt us. The second part is emotional forgiveness. And emotional forgiveness is actually when we replace our negative emotions. So think like resentment, anger, bitterness, vengeance with a more neutral emotion or a more compassionate one. Um, I really want to clarify that forgiveness, in every definition, does not minimize that hurt was done. It doesn't say that that behavior was okay. It doesn't require that you reconcile or restore a relationship, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. And it is not forgetting or pretending that nothing happened, right? Even by saying, I am going to offer forgiveness or I am going to practice forgiveness in my own mind, it doesn't take away that something bad, traumatic, or hurtful happened. That is not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is also very egocentric in the way that we are going to talk about it today. It is something we do for our psychological health, not for anyone else. It's basically saying, you do not get to harm me anymore. You don't get to take up emotional space in my brain. You do not get to live free. If I experienced a trauma when I was young, so like let's say if I experienced a really bad bullying incident when I was 13, that bully doesn't get to live rent-free in my brain, continuing those abusive words and actions and behaviors for the next 40 years. That's not okay, and I'm not going to give permission for that to happen. And that's what forgiveness does. It frees me of having that take of being abused, even when they're not present. You can forgive even when the other person doesn't believe they were wrong, doesn't offer an apology, or doesn't do anything to make the situation better. Remember, forgiveness in the way that we're going to talk about it today is really about our emotional and psychological health. I apologize. I'm going to flip ahead. Okay. Um, I want to talk about the green bean casserole incident and get you guys all hooked in this silly, silly story. But I think a lot of you are going to be able to relate. Okay. So let's just talk about it's time for the holiday dinner. Everyone, and I mean everyone who's coming to this dinner, whether it be family or friend related, has been assigned a dish, right? So if you want to walk in the door, your dish is what you were assigned. So let's just say your sister-in-law, let's say her name is Karen. We can all get a good laugh at this. She's going to bring her famous and very questionable green bean casserole dish again. Um, it's not really assigned to her. She self-advocates. She's like, I'm bringing the green bean casserole. That's what I'm going to do. And no one's going to tell her differently. So the family has said, whatever, you can bring it. In my internal thought, I am going to start thinking to myself, Karen knows that I really do not like this casserole. She does this every year. She always puts it on the table right next to me, and it is horrible. The smell of it makes me sick. My meal is going to be horrible because she's going to bring this stupid green bean casserole. In fact, I think I'm going to get there 20 minutes early so that I can sit at the end of the table so that she doesn't sit next to me. Ooh, and I may even get my brother involved so that he sits on my left, and maybe I can get my cousin to sit on my right. Okay, so I've got this plan. All of a sudden, my brain goes into overdrive, and we call this an emotional spike. My amygdala, right, the center in my brain that is absolutely causing some anger is really activated. My shoulders got tense, my jaw started to lock, and my inner monologue is like, absolutely not going to tolerate this. I go into fight mode, okay? Then my brain starts going into rumination mode. Think about what I just told you all. I am going to know that every year she puts it next to me. I am going to start planning my escape route. I'm going to start planning all of these things. I am not focusing on anything except the fact that this green bean casserole and Karen are going to ruin my holiday dinner. Okay. Also, I might start imagining, I bet Karen called grandma. I bet she said, Mary Beth hates that green bean casserole. I'm going to bring it again. You'll see. It'll be so funny. We'll be able to tease her the whole meal and put it next to her. Maybe she won't eat anything this year. Okay. Yeah. So now, because I'm a therapist, I may even like start diagnosing her really inappropriately in my mind because, right, my brain is just wrong and angry. But now I'm starting to avoid the family, right? I'm sitting away from people. I'm only focusing on the bad thing. I'm not focusing on the fact that, oh my goodness, there are four people in this room that I haven't seen in 8 months. And oh my goodness, so and so just graduated. And oh my goodness, so and so is home on TDY. I'm not seeing anything else except this green bean casserole that has now taken up the entire table. I'm looking for things to reinforce my truth. I'm looking for, oh, look, Karen just took an extra big scoop. And didn't she just wave that spoon too much in the air so that the smell would waft over? I've already convinced myself that she's out to get me, that she's doing this to spite me, and she did it to get under my skin. Okay. So then what happens next? Yep, you guessed it, right? There's this automatic thought. I'm looking at it as a personal attack, and boom, I just go into anger and meanness and just really just an explosion. I hope some people are laughing. I don't like not being able to see people, but I truly hope people are laughing right now. And so, what I want to kind of step back with and use that explanation to kind of go through some of the things that actually happen scientifically, right? We talked about at one point the amygdala is kind of activated, right? And I'm going to explain some of these things in very non-technical terms. But basically, the amygdala is this part of your brain and it functions as an alarm system. The amygdala is like the fire alarm of your brain. When things start happening that might recall danger, might recall a hurtful event, it just activates. Even if there's no more danger there, right? A green bean casserole isn't exactly dangerous, but for me, it represents all of the past hurts maybe that Karen had for me or that I perceived. And so this is also your amygdala is actually also responsible why sometimes even when the threat is gone, your body can really feel things and it's very an immediate response, right? Like even after that casserole has been cleared from the table, I'm still upset. The prefrontal cortex, or the part of your brain that thinks, the part that's up here, we call it the PFC because prefrontal cortex is a lot of words. And that's the part of your brain that makes decisions, right? It's the part of the brain that really helps you think and think rationally. And when we're thinking rationally, it helps you make some emotional regulation. It might shift your perspective a little bit, and it really might assess long-term outcomes. This is where forgiveness works. Forgiveness works to activate this region of the brain. It helps us respond. So when we are practicing forgiveness, the frontal cortex actually goes from intention, I'm sorry, it goes to intentional action from a reactive state. And that might seem a little bit kind of odd, but think about it with this green bean casserole. So she puts the green bean casserole in front of me. And I go to reaction, like, how dare she do this to me again? Does she not get how ridiculous this is to me? She's hurting me over and over again. But that prefrontal cortex might help me think, hmm, you know what? Karen really believes she's good at making green bean casserole, and maybe she just wants to be good at bringing something today, right? It helps me do that intentional thought versus reactive thought. And then the final part that forgiveness that we play with here is anterior cingulate cortex, or the ACC. And what this does, and this is a really kind of important part of the brain that we don't talk about a lot, but it helps detect emotional and rational responses, right? It helps us mediate if we're empathetic. It helps us get a perspective on things. And then it helps us regulate our emotion. And if any of that were activated, if I could have even come up close with forgiveness in that little part of my brain, maybe I wouldn't have reacted so much. Maybe I would have had a better meal. Maybe I could have tasted that delicious pie that was served for dinner. And so to kind of like bring this all together, all these cognitive neural pathways, when we practice forgiveness, we increase our PFC, right? We increase that prefrontal cortex and we decrease the amygdala. So basically, we're making the good stuff bigger and the reactive stuff just a little smaller. Here's the fun part. It reduces chronic stress, it reduces rumination, and it reduces emotional reactivity. We also know through research that it lowers your heart rate, it lowers your cortisol production, and people who practice forgiveness actually have higher success rates in eradicating cardiovascular disease, eradicating like the concerns that come from might be like overweight or increased food intake, and diabetes. And so these studies are really interesting. And we can do all this with just practicing forgiveness. Pretty crazy. All right, so moving on. This is that cycle of resentment that I kind of showed you with the green bean casserole. So there's some kind of triggering event, right? This can be an event for any of us, and it could really be anything, an event, a memory. It can be something small, it can be something indirect. It can be something as simple as a time of year, right? Any triggering event that brings up, I was hurt in the past, someone did wrong by me. That the next thing that happens is there's an interpretation. So our brain assigns a meaning to it. We might assign in the green bean casserole incident, they disrespected me, or maybe I'm not safe, or maybe this always happens. No one sees me, no one values me. These interpretations, this brain kind of trying to make sense of this event, then really kind of moves into emotional escalation. And this is where your amygdala takes over, right? Anger, hurt, frustration, fear, fight or flight. This is where that comes in. And again, I brought up the green bean casserole because I wanted to bring up something almost silly because we have so much more control than we think. I'm really going to let a green bean casserole and the person who brought it ruin my entire day. Well, yep, I absolutely allowed that to happen. And so when that amygdala takes over instead of my prefrontal cortex, I get anger, I get hurt, I get frustration. I actually become a little irrational. Then rumination starts. I replay the event over and over. I might have these conversations in my head that really didn't happen, and I'm rehearsing them and I'm imagining worst case scenario. And what happens with this rumination is it strengthens those neuro connections that maintain resentment. So like once you go through resentment, it becomes more and more and more and more. Then what happens is that withdrawal and avoidance, pulling away from. Remember, I chose not to sit next to my favorite people at the table. I chose to just watch that person, protect myself. And what that does is it reduces opportunities for me to repair relationships, right? Um, and then the final thing is reinforcement of the cycle. And I can tell you, it's just going to go, whoops, sorry, guys. It's just going to go over and over and over again. The cycle cements itself. Basically, we are proving to our brain that this is the correct way to go. And I say all this because when we get back to the green bean casserole, what's your green bean casserole? Okay. What happens every year around the holidays that is going to be your green bean casserole? Okay. And hopefully you can kind of make it a little bit sillier, right? Like, I can't believe that so and so got invited or didn't get invited. I can't believe that we didn't get a gift. We did get a gift. I can't believe I have to be in the same person that was my abuser, right? These are not fun things. But what's your green bean casserole? Because we all have them. What causes you to deliberately isolate yourself? What causes you to become angry even though you don't know it? And now I'm going to give you a little piece of information. And what if you had this piece of information with some of the more minor hurts? Again, abuse, neglect, trauma, abuse at the hands of anyone else is never okay. That is not what I'm saying, and I'm not trying to diminish any of that. But what if someone at the end of dinner came to you and said, "Isn't it so kind that Karen always brings the green bean casserole because that's the only thing that cousin Jimmy will eat because he loves fried onions so much. I know that no one else at the table ever eats it. I know that we all kind of think it's gross, but she remembers that that's the only thing that Jimmy ever eats. I love that Karen thinks that way." Would that change your mind? Would that keep you from exploding? Well, think about forgiveness as a way to keep yourself from exploding. That doesn't mean that hurt didn't happen. It doesn't mean that we might not need therapy or additional help to work through the trauma part of that event. But the forgiveness part just simply says that we are allowed to not carry this anger every single day. We can participate in the meal. We can sit at the table and have conversations without activating that amygdala, without getting so angry and resentful and at times irrational. And so this is how it actually works in the brain. Something happens, we have an automatic thought about it, and then an emotion response. For all of you out there who have either done cognitive behavioral therapy with your therapist, or if you are a therapist and you've done it before, or if you're just kind of like a nerd like me and likes to read about stuff like this is how our brain works. We have just this, there's something that happens, then we get an automatic thought that leads to an emotion, and then that emotion or feeling leads to a behavior. And so if we can really get in there and challenge that thought, right? What that person at the end of the meal did was cause me to challenge my thought. What if that green bean casserole had nothing to do with me? What if that hurt that that person did to me had nothing to do with me, and it had everything to do with them, and I just happened to be in their path? Again, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that you weren't hurt, but you don't have to hurt yourself every day thereafter by carrying that anger. So after you have that, challenge the thought. And that challenging thought causes your brain to actually slow down and analyze, right? Is there something else possible? Maybe this person isn't a very kind person. Maybe this abuse was absolutely horrific and I don't want to be a part of their life, but I don't want them to be a part of my life. And so by forgiving, by just simply saying, I am not going to be angry. And again, I know there's a lot of steps with this. Forgiving is not that easy. We'll get to that. But by challenging that thought, you're able to let go. The reframing part comes in with, you're going to create a more kind of just like a balanced thought in this. And it may simply be, instead of, Karen's out to get me, or she knows I hate that and she does this on purpose to make me sick during this meal. Maybe my reframe is just simply, I really wish Karen didn't make that, right? It doesn't have to be monumentally different. If I knew the new information, I might be able to reframe very differently and say, Karen's making this for Jimmy. That's pretty cool. And what that happens then is a new emotional or behavioral outcome happens. So instead of sitting alone, maybe I'm going to sit next to Jimmy and find out why he only likes green bean casserole. Maybe I'm going to continue to sit somewhere else so I don't have to be as close to that green bean casserole, but maybe I'm going to enjoy the meal or have a conversation and be invested in that conversation instead of being so invested in hating that green bean casserole. And then from a brain perspective, what happens is now my neural pathways are starting to fire differently. My brain becomes a little bit more able to say, I'm more flexible. I'm less reactive. I'm less angry, which means I'm not producing as much cortisol, which means I'm more relaxed, which means I can be present in the moment and maybe let some things wash off me that I didn't before. Now, again, I'm kind of beating this green bean casserole to death, and I know that. But the reality of whatever is your green bean casserole, you have to come up with what is and is not acceptable. Am I going to sit next to it, or am I going to sit at the other end of the table? Am I not going to choose to go to that holiday event because I don't want to be exposed to it? These are all decisions you get to make. You are an individual. But if you are choosing to continue to be in situations where you will be exposed to that green bean casserole, and let's face it, the holidays are famous for this, right? I'm not going to disappoint my parents because I just don't want to be near my brother. I'm not going to not let my children experience this really cool event because I don't want to go back to this same environment. We have to make a lot of very difficult decisions during the holidays, and sometimes we end up kind of activating our trauma response, or we end up re-injuring ourselves because we go into it with so much anger. And so the concept of offering forgiveness is a way for us to healthfully deal with these situations and get through them in a thriving versus surviving perspective. So this cognitive reframing is actually one of the many ways that we can practice forgiveness. There are several evidence-based modalities that are out there that if you need additional help, if you need additional kind of work through, that therapists can actually work through them. There's one called the REACH method. There's one called the NRIGHT method. There's mindfulness forgiveness-based therapy. There's one just called forgiveness-based therapy. But these are all things that people who are trained and skilled in it can actually walk you through and truly help you understand why you just can't give yourself permission to not be angry, either seasonally, right, when you're exposed to it, or I'm sure there's someone out here on this webinar today who's actually angry every day, and it's interfering with relationships. It's interfering with your ability to trust, or maybe it's interfering with your ability to see things the way that they're truly happening, meaning cognitively correct. So when we move into the kind of the next part, let's say that, you know, you've decided to offer your green bean casserole forgiveness, whatever that is for you. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. And I bring this up because forgiveness is very personal in the way we're defining it today. Forgiveness psychologically is about me saying, you do not have the power to abuse me ever again. I am walking away. I am taking this abuse. I am offering forgiveness, and I am not going to carry that rock of pain every single day. That doesn't mean that I'm going to want a relationship with you. That doesn't mean that just because I'm offering forgiveness, that we can be best friends. I might have to separate myself to continue to be healthy and have boundaries. If a relationship can be repaired, it requires accountability and desire on both people. And what I mean by that is, for those of you familiar with the 12-step program, there's a step in there called taking accountability. And it might be that you have to go through and actually face to face or in writing apologize to some people who you hurt in your addiction, in your journey for unhealth. And so getting healthy means taking accountability. Well, in forgiveness, it does require some accountability, but it also requires that both people want to repair it. And sometimes that's just not capable, right? We are not required to say, I want to be healthy with my abuser, with the person who hurt me. And that's okay, right? I just really want to drive this fact home that forgiveness and reconciliation are very, very different. If a relationship or a hurt is to be repaired, there has to be conversations and there has to be accountability. I often get this in behind closed doors of, I feel gaslit. I feel like every time I go into a conversation with this person about holding them accountable for their behavior, I come out feeling worse. And again, some of these things can really be expanded upon in a therapy office, but the reality is healthy people forgive each other. Individuals who want to heal forgive each other. If one person truly doesn't or doesn't want to take accountability, repair may not be possible in this situation until that person has walked their own journey. And that might not be right for you. And so when we go back into that, the concept of, the situation, the automatic thought, and the emotion, if the situation is, I am exposed to the person who did me harm, maybe my automatic thought is, well, I've already forgiven them. Let's see. Maybe this is the year that we can work through this. And my emotion might be hopeful, right? But maybe that person hasn't gotten over or chosen to forgive you the hurt that you caused in retaliation. Maybe this was, not just your green bean casserole, but their green bean casserole, and it kind of came to a head. Maybe a family disagreement or a friend disagreement over something that happened. That's okay. Your challenging thought in that situation might be, I'm glad I did my work. I really hope they can do theirs. And then that reframe isn't, well, they don't care about me or we're never going to heal. That reframe might be, I feel freer knowing that I'm not angry walking into this situation. I really hope they can feel that too. And then the behavior might become less aggressive or less fighting. I don't know if any of you have ever had fights over the holidays that you walk away, you're like, how did that even start? I don't even know how that started. Well, most of it starts because we walk into a room and that amygdala response goes a little bit too big, and we get in that fight, flight, freeze, fawn mentality, and we're just ripe for that. The third part, and probably the most important about healing relationships, are there really have to be boundaries that support safety and trust. And what that means, I like to define boundaries as where I end and you begin. There's nothing really fancy about that definition. It's just very simply about, this is where I end. This is where I am going to say no, and you begin over here. And we can come up to each other, but we can't merge with each other. It's just not going to happen. And that supports safety and trust. But forgiveness, just because I'm offering forgiveness, does not mean that I trust that person yet. After reconciliation, trust and safety should be established if that relationship wants to happen. And so I'm just going to look at the chat real quick. Good, no questions. Well, not good. If you have questions, please ask away. I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen because I just want to talk a little bit, and I want you to see my face about what we're going to talk about next. We're good? We're good. Okay. So when we talk about forgiveness and actually offering it like human to human and in your brain, the first step is really going to be to decide, okay, is this holding me back? Am I allowing myself to be victimized by this hurt every single time I think about it, every single time I maybe happen upon this person, every single time that my phone rings or it's a text from them? Um, and that comes from a physical response. So think about this very personally. And again, you don't need to admit to any of this, but if there is a specific person that every time your phone comes up with a text from them, you get angry, your shoulders come back, your heart rate starts to beat. If there is a situation that you are intentionally avoiding, you need to understand really deeply why that is. Why am I avoiding this? And let's be honest. Well, it might be because I did something wrong by them. It might be I don't want to face what I did. That might be I don't feel safe there and I don't know why. Or it may be, yeah, no, I just don't trust that person. I don't trust that situation, and I'm never going to do that again. And then think about what that's costing you. What is that emotional cost to you? Is it, I'm never going to be a part of that family? Is it, I'm never going to allow my children to be a part of that family? Is it, I'm going to be alone? What are the emotional costs behind it? And if those costs are not okay to you, again, this is your decision. You don't have to do this, but I'm telling you, if you want to lower that emotional cost, this is possibly one way to accomplish that. And it's just to simply say, what am I carrying with us? Why am I allowing that situation to have so much control over me when I only go over there once a year for Thanksgiving? The phone only rings once every 3 months. Why is this causing me so much angst? And then it may be as simple as saying, you know what? I'm not okay with the way this person treats me. And the green bean example is kind of a silly thing, but one of the things I get all the time over the holidays as a therapist is, how do I deal with my emotionally bankrupt relative? Let's say that it is, the person who you would identify as a parent figure who just wasn't there for you in the way that you believe they should be there for you. And Now that you're both adults and you may or may not have an adult relationship with them, but you're not okay with it. Either you want the relationship to be better or you just don't want to deal with the awkwardness of it. And really thinking about, okay, is this a conversation I need to have? Is this a conversation about, you hurt me, I'm not okay with it, let's talk about this? Or is this just an internal conversation of, you know what, I am angry every time I see this person's name, every time I see this person's text, or every time I have to deal with this person. I'm going to offer them forgiveness. Again, I'm not going to tell them what they did was right. I don't really want to have a conversation with them. I just want to offer forgiveness so they don't offer a place in my mind. And so then all you're going to be doing is saying, I release it, right? And again, there's a lot of therapeutic journeys and skills that we can teach in the course of therapy, not in the course of a 60-minute little lunch and learn. But the first part of that is to just say, I am releasing the anger and the resentment. I no longer want to be vengeful about this person. And I think we would all agree that in this day and age, there's enough anger, there's enough hatred. If I can teach my own brain to get rid of some of that, I would be calmer. I would be less reactive. I would be a better mom, sister, best friend, uh, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever the verb is, or whatever the title is there. Once that resentment starts to lower, once that anger is controllable, your other relationships are really going to increase. Remember, every time you're exposed to something that causes anger and resentment, that amygdala activates and it really lowers your ability to think in your frontal cortex. And when you can't think in your frontal cortex, you're not making smart, emotionally wise decisions. And so it might show up in, I can't trust anyone. I can't, I don't trust my parent figure, but I don't trust anyone to take care of me. So I only can take care of myself. If that could diminish just based on the simple act of forgiveness, we would be a very different person. Um, and so kind of, as we really kind of come to this how to forgive part, there's no one right way, but there is a step process on how to forgive. And the first part is actually understanding what you are hurt by, what you are angry by. And so when you take that first step and you acknowledge it, there might be some pain. And again, if it's too much to sit with, or maybe talk with a friend about, or talk with your partner about, talk with a parent about, I would encourage people to work through that process in a therapeutic program. The second step is really to understand, am I in danger or am I not? And I say that because sometimes when we talk about hurt, forgiveness, trauma, it's still very active and it's not safe. And so if there is a safety component, if someone is being harmed, if someone is being hurt, if someone is being put in harm's way, I very much want to encourage you and understand we need to get to safety before we talk about forgiveness. So for the purposes of today, we're talking about hurt that has happened in the past. And so once you understand if you're safe or not safe, then you can move on to acknowledging it. And what would be the best way for you to acknowledge it? Is this, I never want to have anything to do with this person again. I just need to take this journey of forgiveness very independently. Or is this I really need to find a safe space to where I can work through this conversation with another person? There is a very big misunderstanding that in order to have forgiveness happen, there has to be some kind of retribution or vengeance. I'm going to pick on Brandy just because I see her face. If Brandy did something to wrong me and I really want to have a conversation with Brandy about it, I may arrange for a quiet time. I may arrange for a mediator. I may arrange for a neutral third party. But after I say my piece, she doesn't have to be obedient to me. It doesn't mean she doesn't hurt. She did not hear me. It doesn't mean she's not listening. It means she's not obedient. It might mean that she has a very different perspective of the situation. The example I give all the time to clients is I hold up this wooden square and I say, what do you see? Most people say a wooden square. And I was like, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong. Come on, please look at it again. That's not what you see. I'm like, no, seriously, I see a square. And then I turn it around and I say, no, you don't. You see my name. See Mary Beth right here. How did you not see that? And then they always say, well, look at what you're looking at. I'm like, oh, yeah, now I see a wooden square. So you're wrong. I see a wooden square, right? But that's how conversations happen. And that's how situations happen, sometimes, especially with traumas or little hurts. We see them from such different perspectives, right? If we were both looking at the same picture, we could have a much different conversation. But when you're looking at this side, you might have no idea that there's white lettering on the other side. And quite frankly, you might not have the ability to say, hey, can you turn that around? Can you show me the other side? So just because Brandy and I are going to get to a situation where I feel the need to explain something, in order to truly understand and forgive this event in my mind, not forget it, not reconcile, but just forgive, I feel like I need a conversation. I need to go into that understanding that Brandy gets to have that conversation too, and we might not be looking at the same page. So that's, so that's kind of the two, whether you're doing an independent forgiveness or whether you're kind of coming together as a group. Now, what I can say is when you're coming together as two or more people to work through forgiveness or to work through something, typically you're looking for reconciliation, not forgiveness. And the difference is I really want a relationship with Brandy versus I just don't want to be hurt by the memory of this event every day. And then as we move forward, there's a commitment, right? The fourth step of forgiveness is committing that every day I am going to remember that I'm not hurt by this anymore. And when my automatic thought comes up of, I'm really angry at Brandy, my next thought is, no, I'm not. I've forgiven her. Doesn't mean what she did is right. It doesn't mean that I'm okay with what she did with me. It doesn't mean that she gets to do that to anyone else. And it doesn't mean that it's okay. It means that I'm not going to beat myself up every day and relive that trauma every day. And then the final step is moving on. So now that I've accepted that I'm not going to let this incident, whatever it was with Brandy and I, take up space, I'm not going to let that green bean casserole occupy my mental space anymore. I have to move on. And so that means every time I see a green bean casserole, I'm going to have a different thought. Every time that I have to encounter this again, to where all of a sudden it's like, no, it doesn't bother me anymore. And again, if this is something you can do individually, wonderful, awesome, great, fantastic. But if you can't, please, there are so many wonderful therapists out there who can really help walk you through a journey of forgiveness. If you have found that you're really in a situation where it's just taking up too much mental power, it's causing you to not want to go to things, it's causing you to isolate, it's causing you to kind of just really go back into your own shell. Talk to someone about what forgiveness is. Um, There's also some comments that I typically get about this time of um, what do you tell people if they think forgiveness makes you weak? Um, and there's a lot of different responses to this. But I think what makes me weak, and I think what research has proven makes other people weak, is to purposefully take on a victim role. And if I'm going to let the memory of something that happened 10 years ago impact me every single day or every single holiday for the rest of my life, then I'm actively choosing to be that person's victim, even when they're not in the room anymore. And I refuse to do that. And I think you would too. And so that's just what I offer is forgiveness is such a powerful tool that it's not something that makes you weak, but I understand the perception behind it. Um, we are at we are at quarter of, so there's 15 minutes left. I would really like to just ask, are there questions? Are there concerns? Does anyone want to have a specific sideline conversation that we can kind of bring to the group about what forgiveness is, or maybe a next step into accomplishing it? I'm a therapist. I can stay quiet for a very long time. But what I would like to invite people is, our kind of our commitment is I'm so thankful that you all listened in. If you don't have, any other input, or if you just want to listen to see if there's other conversations, please stay. I'm just going to hang out and see if there's any questions or concerns. If you do want to take 5 minutes to go reset your day before your 1 o'clock appointments, I'm happy that. And I'm just so grateful that you came in to listen to a little bit about forgiveness. It is often a topic that's not talked about very much. And I would also encourage anyone who's really interested to just do some of the research and reading about how forgiveness actually heals the brain. There's two wonderful kind of schools of thought about it. There is the spirituality line of thought, and there is the secular line of thought. Please feel free to research what feels comfortable and right for you. But we do know that forgiveness heals the brain, especially the trauma brain. Um, Brandy, we've got a question.
I awesome. So yeah, just really quickly, thank you all for being here. And if you're new here this week, welcome. But also these recordings will be going out onto our YouTube very soon. I'm still working on kind of creating that structure. But as soon as that is available, I'll have it posted on our Cohen Clinic social medias. But then also, I will send out an email to the people that have participated or had registered so that everyone knows that they have access to that. And then also just to kind of let you know, next week we have kind of on board is our subject of stress next week. So regulating your nervous system, which is a really cool kind of deep dive into that piece. So I hope to see a lot of you again next week.